Hey guys, JP back for another video. Today we are going to be touring the Barrier Reef. This is us leaving the port of Sydney on our cruise, and this Barrier Reef Cruise is with Carnival. We left home port here and set sail, and the cruise itself was about 10 days, and I'm going to talk to you today about cost, lodging, food, how much we spent on tours, etc. And so I hope you enjoy. Our first stop here is Arlie Beach after a few sea days. And Arlie Beach is something that is new to us. It's not a location that we typically would have thought, hey, let's go there. But it's actually a very, very nice port. There were a lot of ships there. You can tell this is a very popular sailing destination. A lot of boats in the marina here. This is apparently a pretty popular resort town, and this is the little beach that's associated with Arlie. They had this little lagoon here that was a man-made spot to swim in. We're actually visiting this area during its winter time, so the water was a little bit frigid, but we made the most of the trip. You could see how sunny it is, and it wasn't honestly that bad. The weather was pretty perfect outside of the fact that the water was just slightly cold. The temperature itself was about mid-70s, low 80s for the most part for the entire cruise. And you can see around this port there's this little town. Pretty cute. It's something you might see, as a resort town for Jaws or something. But it was a pretty nice stop for the most part. Nice relaxing day. Next stop on our cruise was Cairns, and this is considered to be the gateway to the Barrier Reef, and so we decided to spend some money here and take a Barrier Reef tour. We took this ship out to a barrier island called Green Island, and here we actually rented some snorkel gear and decided, hey, let's go out and check this thing out, this Barrier Reef. We've always read about this in, our books about how big the Barrier Reef is, how gigantic this Barrier Reef system is, and so we wanted to see it for ourselves, and so that's exactly what we did. You could see Dylan there and my wife were all snorkeling around this Barrier Reef, and we did see quite a few fish along with a pretty nice view of the Barrier Reef itself. We spent about $200 if you're interested in this tour with Great Reef Adventures, and the cost of the $200 went towards the snorkel gear and the transportation out to this barrier island, which they maintain. But you can see there are a lot of different fish, a lot of coral in this area. If you aren't a fan of using water shoes or your fins, you might want to reconsider that, because you will be potentially stepping on a lot of rocks. But it's quite beautiful. I felt like I was swimming in an aquarium. The day was slightly cloudy, and so maybe the water wasn't as clear as we would have hoped, but still very pretty. This is part of I believe it's called a thermo cleanse, where you'll have pockets of warm water throughout the reef. So we would feel the cold water at parts, and then we would feel like these little jets of warm water throughout. You could see a starfish there. And we saw all sorts of different fish during this brief time that we had at this Barrier Reef. So it was quite a pleasant experience. My wife and son both enjoyed it, and I would certainly encourage you to go out and do this. For me, this was kind of a bucket list item, and so I was happy to put the money towards this tour. Now, later on in our trip here, we do end up going to the Philippines, specifically Palawan, and we do a bit of snorkeling there as well, and I'll give you my thoughts in terms of how the Great Barrier Reef compares to these areas. But suffice it to say, this was a pretty fun experience. We totally had an enjoyable time here, and I believe we got our money's worth. So I'm happy with what we saw out here. There were a lot of different colored rainbow fish. We saw a few different types of coral here. In addition, we did see a skate, which you might see later on in the video. If you haven't already, please like the video. It really helps with the channel, and it helps encourage me at least to keep going with these videos. But I wanted to really give you my comments on our overall trip through Australia thus far. I really enjoyed spending time in Sydney. The cruise with Carnival was also pretty pleasant. It's not something I would necessarily have thought of doing initially, but when you're in Australia and you have this opportunity, we had to go see the reef, and so that's why we decided to do the cruise. The 10 days that we were on the cruise, we did spend about 6 of those days at port and the rest of those days at sea. Now, spending that much time at sea can be a little bit challenging. You need to find things to do, but for the most part, it was a pretty pleasant experience. I would also say that Carnival, here's that skate that I was mentioning earlier. I will say that Carnival really had a lot of tender services during this cruise, and the tenders were sometimes a bit rough, which led to us getting nauseous at times. I wasn't sure if perhaps the reason for the frequent tender services was just because of the size of the ship, but I can tell you it was at times nauseating, so just be forewarned. Our next stop here is Port Douglas, and at Port Douglas, they are known for their lush green landscapes as well as this 4-mile beach, and it does literally look like it's about 4 miles. It's a pretty large, ginormous beach, and lots of people playing. You could see them playing the volleyball with their feet there. Lots of sandcastles. Dylan got in on the action in terms of trying to build these sandcastles. Pretty beach, lots and lots of sights to take in with the ocean, and you could see how enormous it is. We just decided to spend the day at the beach and just take in some of the weather here because it was quite beautiful. The water, like I mentioned, was a little bit chilly, so we only basically stuck our feet in the water. It wasn't something I really had any interest in doing at this point during the cruise, but my wife and son, they both worked on these little sandcastles, and so they spent the majority of time doing that, and you can see the progress they're making there. You could see Dylan here just grabbing some water out of the ocean to help solidify some of the sand for his castle here. And that was it for Port Douglas. The next stop here was Willis Island, and I wouldn't call this a stop, it was more like a drive-by. The only people that live on this island are the weather people, because they are basically just forecasting and telling the Australians what the weather is like, but we didn't stop there. We just basically drove by. This is just a couple of views of Humpback Highway. This was the route that the cruise ship took, so you do see occasional blowing of the water out in these little jets, and these are whales basically. This is their migratory path. And next up here we went to Morton Island, another resort village, and you could see the wreckage here that's called Tangalooma Wreckage. This island is entirely run by generators, and it is a resort, so they do have a hotel there that's run by a company. The Tangalooma Wrecks were an intentional shipwreck of about 15 ships, and you're going to see that we kayak out there to take a closer look at those wrecks. Here's Dylan helping me out here, and we basically just kayaked out to these sunken ships. These sunken ships do provide some attraction for the local wildlife, the marine life in this area. So you'll see some coral in this location and some sea turtles perhaps, but I felt like the water was perhaps a little too cold for maybe some of the marine life to be gathering in the area at this time. But that's the Tangalooma Wrecks. Pretty. Like I said, it's about 15 ships that they intentionally sank. Initially, it was for the purposes of providing some safe harbor for some of the ships, but over time it has become more of a tourist attraction than anything else. As there is low tide, you could see the wrecks a little bit more clearly as the day develops, but we stayed for just a few hours during this trip, so we didn't get quite the advantage of looking at the wrecks from a deeper point of view, but still pretty cool experience. We enjoyed it. We could see how these things kind of jut out. I was kind of worried about tetanus being an issue, so we didn't get that close. So me and Dylan, we just kind of did our thing with the kayaks and headed back. It took about 1 to 2 hours on the kayak out here, so it was a nice experience. Let's talk cost. So the cruise itself was $2,000 for a 10-day cruise, which was not a bad price. Now again, I don't know how much in port fees Carnival actually puts towards this, but maybe that's why the cruise value was so low. Lodging, transportation, and food were all zero because we stuck to our budget, and we spent about $240 on various things for tours, leaving our grand total to about $2,273 with a per day average of about $227. For a family of 3, I think that's a pretty good value, so I hope you enjoyed what we did. Next stop here is Manila. Like and subscribe, and see you there.